Today on Listen Up, science and faith at war. Is friction between the two inevitable, or are they more compatible than what we might think? That's next. Welcome to Listen Up, where we invite you to think deeply with a Christian perspective on the news. I'm Lorna Dueck. This is a year of celebration for science. Exactly 200 years ago, Charles Darwin was born. 150 years ago, he published The Origin of the Species. And 400 years ago, Galileo pointed his telescope to the heavens for the first time. You'd think that after all that time, faith and science might have learned to get along. Well, today, world-renowned scientist Dr. Francis Collins helps us understand some of the conflict on the journey to getting along with faith and science. He's the former director of the National Human Genome Research Institute, where he led the successful effort to complete the Human Genome Project, directed at mapping and sequencing all the human DNA. His book, The Language of God, explains how he harmonized his science and his God. But it's antagonism that's recently brought faith and science into the headlines. In Canada, there was much to-do made over the suitability of Canada's science minister, Gary Goodyear, for his political portfolio. The kerfuffle arose when the minister, who's a devout Christian, refused to confirm in a press interview whether or not he believed in evolution. The friction between science and faith has been felt most south of the border. Thinking through what that means takes more than a steep cup of coffee and a few conversations among ethicists.
If we don't take more time on this issue, we will absolutely live to regret it. There's just no question that there's certain things you can't undo very easily.
Author Eric Metaxas runs Socrates in the City, a Manhattan cocktail party and speakers forum that wrestles with issues that shape our lives, like the implications of stem cell science.
We're making decisions that are going to affect how our children and our children's children and unto generations are going to look at what is a human being.
Eric is a biographer of historic leaders who battled both slavery and the gas chambers of Nazi Germany, a researcher into how the human mind can be twisted for evil. He argues the world of science needs the conscience that comes from God.
The power that's been given to us as human beings, it is an awesome, a terrible power that we have the ability to create life, to destroy life. God has given us this extraordinary ability, but we've got to hold it with awe and trepidation, and we've got to respect it, and we've got to move slowly, because the things that we do can just have amazing ramifications.
So do science and faith have to be at odds? Our first guests have different opinions on that. Joining us in studio is Dr. Michael Caldwell. He's a paleontologist and chair of biological sciences at the University of Alberta. And from Alberta, his friend and colleague, Denis Lamoureux, professor of science and religion at St. Joseph's College at the University of Alberta. Welcome, Denis. And welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Michael, let's start with you. Do science and faith have to be at odds?
No. It's an extremely simple answer to give, and I'll repeat it because it's so simple. The answer is no, they do not. And the reason that they don't, from my point of view, is that they are actually intended in their origins to address very different sorts of questions.
Okay, we're going to ask your friend Denis to join in on us now. And Denis, I mean, you've written, the title of your book just jumps right into the confusion perhaps, where you say your book title is I Love Jesus and I Accept Evolution. So I got to ask you, can the two worlds live together?
Well, they live together in my mind, in my heart. When it comes to science, I simply study nature, the book of nature, if you wish, God's book of nature. And when I study the scriptures, the book of God's words, I study the book of God's words. And so they're two different books with different intentionalities.
Okay, so let's look specifically at the question of evolution because it is one of the hot button issues. An Angus Reid poll just last August found 22% of Canadians believe God created human beings in their present form. In Alberta, where both you professors are from, support for that view stands at 40%. Is there anything wrong with that perspective? Denis, let's start with you.
Well, when you say, is there anything wrong with it, there's a number of different approaches to this issue of origins. 30 years ago, I would have embraced the view that, the world is 6,000 years old. So no, I don't see anything necessarily wrong with it, say, religiously. But from a scientific perspective, the evidence for evolution has been here for quite a long time. And I think within the religious community, and I am a Christian, that we have to come to terms with this.
There is an understanding that the natural world has a story to tell. And even though people may find themselves personally, and in this case very obviously spiritually, in conflict with the origin story that sometimes the natural world gives us as an exemplar of how it all happened, I think the fact that we can hold these two things in tension is actually very important.
So what do you think are the most important aspects of the origin debate that we should be wrestling with?
Well, right now, I think the single most important aspect of the origin debate is the presentation that it usually gets in the media as a polarized dichotomy, as it's either evolution with no God in the process whatsoever, or it's only a God-driven young earth creation story from Genesis. And that these two polar opposites are what is presented as the reality of the debate.
Okay.
Where in fact there's a whole story in between.
And you two represent that quite in an interesting way because, Denis, you do include faith in your research and Michael, you don't.
I don't.
Okay, but yet you guys are friends. Tell me how that works, and tell me about the conversations you have with each other.
Well, I'll start by adding, Lorna, Denis doesn't actually present his religious beliefs in his science, even though his research within the portfolio he holds at St. Joseph's College is about the relationship between science and religion. Into that system, he does inflict his own personal beliefs, but there it's justified because he's looking at the social and personal issues that are associated with this debate. But when Dennis comes to my lab to publish a little science, and I will say it's in my lab when he comes to do a little science, that he leaves God at the door.
Okay, Denis, let's pick it up with you because your PhD, one of your PhDs is in evolutionary biology, the evolution of the jaw and teeth. Is that what you do? You leave God at the door of
That's absolutely
Michael's
right. Mike's been absolutely terrific in keeping my hand in science and some pretty modest projects. But when I walk into the laboratory, I mean, we work with the assumption that evolution is a natural process, all done by natural laws, and we limit ourselves to that. But when that is done and we go over to the faculty club and sit down and have a beer or something like that, the discussion of whether God's behind it or not, that's not a scientific discussion. We'll never put that in our papers. But do we have a great discussion on whether there's a God behind the process or not? Well, absolutely. Now, at that point, we're not doing science, but we're actually walking into my domain of philosophy and theology, and we're asking larger questions, metaphysical questions. In other words, questions beyond the physical, and now it becomes sort of a wrestling of our personal beliefs between the two of us.
All right, well, we have to go to the metaphysical of time, and we are out of it. Denis, thank you very much there in Edmonton, and Dr. Michael Caldwell.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And we have more on both of our professors at our website at listenuptv.com. And when we return, a theologian who contributes to the field of science and ethics and says not only are the two compatible, they need each other. That's next.